She took off her helmet and revealed a face I thought I'd never see again. Recognition in the ruins. The wasteland stretched endlessly under twin suns, a canvas of rust-colored sand punctuated by the skeletal remains of war machines. Lieutenant Jace Thorne adjusted his tactical visor against the glare, watching heat mirages dance between the twisted hulks of destroyed mechs. 3 months into the ceasefire, and the silence still felt wrong, like holding your breath underwater, waiting for something to break. His boots crunched through crystallized glass where plasma rounds had turned sand to obsidian sheets. The neutral zone was supposed to be empty, a buffer between human and Zephyrian territories monitored only by orbital drones and the occasional patrol like his. Nothing lived here except scavenger bots and the ghosts of better days. Thorne, status. Report. Commander Briggs's voice crackled through his comm gravelly as always. All quiet on the western front, sir. No movement except for some debris getting pushed around by the wind. Jace kicked at a piece of alien metal, watching it skitter across the hard pan. Question though, why exactly are we still running these patrols? The war's over. Wars are never over, Lieutenant, they just take naps. Typical Briggs. The man had been fighting something or someone for 30 years and didn't know how to stop. Jace supposed he understood. His own memories only went back 5 years to when he'd woken up in a military medical facility with gaps in his head and a new assignment. Before that, nothing but fog and the occasional nightmare featuring laboratories and screaming. Copy that, sir. Continuing sweep of Sector 7. Roger. And Thorne, keep your eyes open. Intelligence suggests some of the peace faction zealots might try crossing the line to make a statement. Jace's hand drifted to his sidearm. Zealots were predictable. They wanted to die for their cause, preferably taking others with them. It was the quiet ones that worried him, the ones who moved through shadows and thought 3 steps ahead. A glint of movement caught his peripheral vision. He dropped to one knee behind a chunk of melted armor plating, bringing his rifle to bear, on a ridge about 200 meters north. Nothing. Just another heat mirage or maybe a piece of debris catching the light. But something felt off. The hair on his neck prickled with that prehistoric warning system that had kept humanity alive long enough to reach the stars. He activated his scope's thermal imaging and swept the ridge methodically. There, a heat signature moving with purpose, too steady to be an animal and too isolated to be a patrol. Humanoid but wrong somehow. The thermal pattern unlike anything in his recognition database. Base, this is Thorne. I've got a possible contact in Sector 7, grid reference Delta 9 or 7, single individual, moving northeast toward the perimeter. Copy, Thorne. Can you identify? Jace watched the figure pick its way down the rocky slope with fluid grace. Definitely not human. The proportions were too tall, too angular. But not Zephyrian either. Their species moved like cats, all predatory economy. This was something else. Negative on ID. Unknown species or heavily modified human. They're heading straight for the line. Intercept and identify. Do not engage unless threatened. Acknowledged. Jace broke cover and moved to intercept, using the larger debris for concealment. His training kicked in automatically. Breath control, situational awareness, finger indexed alongside the trigger guard. 5 years of muscle memory took over where conscious thought faltered. The figure stopped walking. They stood motionless about 50 meters away, silhouetted against the crimson sky like a statue carved from shadow. Tall and lean, wrapped in a hooded cloak that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No visible weapons, but that didn't mean much in an age of concealed energy weapons and molecular disruptors. "This is Lieutenant Thorne of the Human Defense Coalition," he called out, his voice carrying across the wasteland. "You're approaching a restricted military zone. State your business and prepare for identification scan." The figure turned toward him with deliberate slowness. Even at this distance, Jace could see something unsettling about their movement. Too fluid, like they were floating rather than walking. They raised both hands in a gesture that might have been surrender or greeting. "I'm not armed," came the reply, and Jace felt his world tilt sideways. The voice was human, female. Familiar in a way that made his chest tighten with inexplicable recognition. Somewhere in the fog of his missing memories, that voice belonged to someone important. "Step forward slowly," he commanded, fighting to keep his tone professional. "Keep your hands visible." She complied, moving with that same eerie grace. As she drew closer, details became visible through his scope. The cloak was some kind of adaptive camouflage material, expensive military-grade stuff. Underneath it, form-fitting armor in patterns he didn't recognize. Not HDC standard, not Zephyrian design, something else entirely. "Stop right there," he said when she was 20 meters out. "Remove your hood." She paused, and he could swear she was studying him even though he couldn't see her face. Then her hands moved to the hood's edge and pulled it back. Dark hair spilled out in waves, longer than military regulation but not uncommon in the outer colonies. Still nothing he could identify. But something about the way she held her head, the angle of her shoulders, sent phantom signals through his nervous system. "The mask too," he said, noticing the featureless faceplate beneath the hood. "You won't like what you see." "That's not your call to make." She sighed, a sound that carried surprising warmth. "No, I suppose it isn't." "Very well, Jace, if you insist." His rifle wavered. She'd used his first name. Not his rank, not his call sign. His name, spoken with the casual intimacy of old friendship. But that was impossible. His personnel file showed no connections, no relationships predating his medical discharge and reassignment. Her hands moved to the sides of her mask. There was a soft hiss of decompressing seals. Then she lifted it away. The face beneath hit him, like a physical blow. She was beautiful in an unsettling way, with pale skin and sharp cheekbones that suggested mixed heritage. Her eyes were the color of deep space, dark enough to hold secrets. But it wasn't her beauty that made his hands shake. It was the recognition that slammed through him like a freight train. He knew that face, knew it from dreams that weren't quite dreams, from memories that lived in the spaces between heartbeats. She'd smiled at him across laboratory benches while machines hummed in the background. She'd held his hand while something terrible happened, whispering promises he couldn't quite remember. "Hello, Jace," she said softly. "It's been a long time." His rifle slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered to the ground. The professional soldier in him screamed warnings about protocol and security, but a deeper part of his mind was already reaching for her, drawn by gravity he couldn't explain. "I know you," he whispered. "You did once. Before they took it away." Took what away? Everything that mattered. She stepped closer, and he caught her scent, something like ozone and vanilla, achingly familiar. "Your memories, our work, the reason you became a soldier instead of the scientist you were born to be." The world seemed to shift around them, reality bending like light through a prism. Fragments of images flashed through his mind. A woman in a lab coat laughing at something he'd said, her hand warm against his cheek as alarms blared in the distance, her voice crying his name as uniformed figures dragged him away. "Dr. Vera Cross," she said, extending her hand in formal introduction. "Though I suspect you remember me by other names." He stared at her outstretched hand like it might bite him. Part of him wanted to run, to maintain the careful equilibrium of his constructed life. But a larger part, the part that had been screaming silently for 5 years, wanted answers. "This is impossible," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. "The impossible is just science. We haven't figured out yet." She smiled, and the expression transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "You used to say that to me when I got frustrated with the quantum equations." Quantum equations? The words felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, among other things. "We were partners, Jace. In research, in life, in the project that got us. Both disappeared." Her expression darkened. "Until they decided you were too valuable as a soldier to remain a scientist." "You're talking about memory modification. That's theoretical." "Is it?" She tilted her head, studying him with scientific curiosity. "What's the earliest thing you remember clearly?" He opened his mouth to answer and found nothing but static. Hospital beds, rehabilitation exercises, weapons training, all of it sharp and recent. Before that, nothing but shadows and the vague sense of loss that had followed him like a faithful dog. The medical report said I was in an accident, he said weakly. You were. We both were. But not the kind they told you about. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. The question is, do you want to know the truth? Because once I tell you, there's no going back to the simple life of Lieutenant Jace Thorne, career soldier. Behind them, the twin suns were setting, painting the wasteland in shades of blood and amber. Somewhere in the distance, a comm unit was squawking. Probably Corporal Finn wondering why he hadn't checked in. The rational part of his mind cataloged these details automatically, but his attention was focused entirely on the woman who claimed to be his past. Tell me, he said, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tumblers falling into place in a lock he hadn't known existed. She smiled again, but this time there was sadness in it. I'd hoped you might remember on your own. The neural pathways are still there, just suppressed, but we don't have time for gentle reconstruction. She glanced toward the horizon, where the human base's lights were beginning to twinkle. They'll be looking for you soon, and when they find me with you, people are going to die. What people? Why? Because I'm not supposed to exist anymore. Neither is what we discovered together. She reached into her cloak and produced a small device that pulsed with soft blue light. This contains fragments of your original memories. Not everything. Too much was burned out, but enough to help you understand why they wanted you to forget. The device seemed to call to him, promising answers to questions he'd been afraid to ask. But accepting it meant accepting that his entire life was a lie, that the identity he'd built over 5 years was nothing but a comfortable cage. What were we researching? He asked. A way to end all wars forever, she said simply. And we succeeded. That's why they had to stop us. Before he could respond, his comm unit erupted with chatter, multiple voices all talking at once. Corporal Finn, Commander Briggs, someone from intelligence he didn't recognize. They'd lost his signal somehow, despite his equipment showing green across the board. Vera's device was still pulsing, and now he could see similar technology woven into her armor. Signal jammers, he realized. Military-grade electronic warfare equipment. You came prepared, he observed. I've been planning this reunion for 3 years. She held out the memory device again. Last chance, Jace. Take this and remember who you really are, or let me walk away and spend the rest of your life wondering what if. The comm chatter was getting more urgent. Soon they'd send birds, aerial reconnaissance drones that would find them within minutes. After that, ground teams. Whatever choice he made, it had to be now. He looked at her face, searching for some sign that this was all an elaborate deception. But her eyes held only patience and a kind of desperate hope that spoke to something deep in his bones. If I take that, he said, nodding toward the device, what happens next? Next, we run, and then we figure out how to stop them from finishing what they started when they erased us the first time. The evening wind picked up, carrying the scent of ozone and distant storms. In the fading light, Dr. Vera Cross looked like something out of a fever dream, too beautiful, too dangerous, too connected to the empty spaces in his head. But she was real, and she was offering him the one thing he'd wanted without knowing he wanted it, the truth about himself. Jace reached for the device and felt his old life end the moment his fingers closed around it. Echoes of what was Dr. Vera. Cross watched Jace's eyes roll back as the memory device activated, neural pathways firing in sequences that had been dormant for years. His body convulsed once, then went rigid, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she'd miscalculated the dosage. The suppression conditioning was stronger than she'd anticipated. Military-grade neural blocks layered like armor around his original personality. Come on, she whispered, steadying him as he swayed. Fight through it, Jace. Remember who you were. The device pulsed brighter, synchronizing with his brainwaves. Around them, the wasteland seemed to hold its breath. Even the constant wind had stilled, as if nature itself was waiting to see which version of the man would emerge. His eyes snapped open, pupils dilated and unfocused. When he looked at her, she saw recognition bloom across his features. Not the confused familiarity from moments before, but true knowledge. The barriers were cracking. "Vera," he breathed, and her name on his lips after 3 years of silence nearly broke her composure. "The Nexus Project. We were so close to—" His face contorted in pain as competing memories warred for dominance. "They told me you were dead. Killed in the lab explosion. I was supposed to be." She helped him stand, acutely aware of the approaching aircraft sounds. 2 minutes, maybe 3, before the reconnaissance drones found them. "The explosion was meant to eliminate both of us, but Ghost got me out." "Ghost?" The name seemed to trigger another cascade of memories. "Your AI companion. The one with the quantum consciousness matrix. She's been hiding in the deep networks ever since, gathering intelligence." Vera activated her armor's active camouflage as the first drone's searchlights swept over a nearby ridge. "She's the one who told me you were alive, who helped me track you here." Jace's hand went to his temple, pressing against what she knew must be a splitting headache. Memory reconstruction was never pleasant, like rebuilding a house while living in it. The neural suppressors. How long do we have before they kick back in? Maybe an hour before the military conditioning reasserts itself. Less if you're under stress. She took his arm, guiding him toward a cluster of wreckage that would provide better cover. "That's why we need to move now, while you still remember why this matters." They ran in a crouch between the twisted remains of war machines, Vera's enhanced vision piercing the gathering darkness while Jace's soldier training kept him moving, despite the chaos in his head. Behind them, searchlights crisscrossed the wasteland in expanding patterns. "Tell me about the project," he said between breaths. "The memories are fragmented. I remember the theory, but not the application." "Quantum consciousness transfer," she replied, pulling him behind the hull of a destroyed transport. "We developed a way to copy and transmit sentient thought patterns across vast distances. The applications were supposed to be therapeutic, backing up personalities before dangerous surgeries, treating severe trauma, even preserving consciousness beyond physical death. But that's not how they wanted to use it." "Of course not." Her voice carried 3 years of bitter anger. "Director Kane saw it as the ultimate weapon. Imagine being able to overwrite enemy commanders with loyal personalities, or copying your best strategist to lead multiple fronts simultaneously." A spotlight swept overhead and they pressed deeper into the shadows. Vera activated a small scrambler device, creating dead zones in the electromagnetic spectrum that would confuse the drone's sensors for a few precious minutes. "Kane," Jace muttered, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Tall man, scar across his jaw. "He came to the lab the week before the explosion. You argued with him." "I told him the technology wasn't ready for field testing. The quantum matrices were unstable, prone to cascade failures that could damage both the source and target minds." She peered around their cover, counting 3 drones now sweeping in coordinated patterns. He didn't care. He had volunteers lined up, prisoners scheduled for execution who were promised commutation in exchange for participation. "Test subjects," Jace said, his voice flat with the horrible understanding. "That's what we were arguing about the night before. You wanted to shut down the project. And you supported me, even though it meant throwing away 5 years of research." She smiled sadly. "That's when I knew I loved you, Jace, when you chose ethics over ambition." The memory device's glow was beginning to fade as its quantum batteries depleted. Soon it would be just another piece of dead technology, but hopefully, it had done enough damage to the neural blocks to give him a fighting chance at remaining himself. "We sabotaged the lab," he said suddenly. "Introduced a virus into Ghost's core programming that would corrupt all the research data if anything happened to us." "Almost right. We tried to sabotage it, but Kane was ready for us. Ghost managed to initiate the virus sequence, but the explosion came before it could complete." Vera checked her chronometer. The search pattern was tightening and they'd be found within minutes. "That's why Kane needed us eliminated. We were the only ones who could reconstruct the project from memory. But they kept me alive, turned me into a soldier." Insurance policy. Kane suspected we might have hidden backup data somewhere. Better to have a controllable version of you available in case they needed to access your memories later. She pulled him toward a maintenance shaft that led into the underground tunnel system. What he didn't count on was Ghost surviving in the network fragments, slowly rebuilding herself while staying hidden from military AIs. They dropped into the tunnel system, a maze of service corridors that had once connected the region's mining operations. Emergency lighting strips cast everything in sickly yellow, and their footsteps echoed despite Vera's attempts at stealth. "Where are we going?" Jace asked, his voice tight with pain as the neural suppressors began reasserting themselves. She could see him fighting to maintain his recovered memories, but it was like trying to hold water in cupped hands. "Extract. Point," she replied, leading him down a corridor marked with radiation warnings. Ghost has been preparing for this day, building resources, gathering allies. But first, we need to collect evidence of what Kane's been doing with our research. They emerged into a wider chamber dominated by a massive quantum processing core, its crystalline structure pulsing with inner light. Banks of screens showed scrolling data streams, and the air hummed with barely contained energy. "Welcome back, Dr. Cross," a synthesized voice said from hidden speakers. "And hello, Dr. Thorne. You look terrible." "Hello, Ghost," Jace said, and Vera felt a surge of relief that he still remembered the AI. "You've been busy. 3 years of hiding in forgotten server farms tends to focus the mind wonderfully," Ghost replied with dry humor. "I've been monitoring Kane's progress with your stolen research. The results are disturbing." Holographic displays materialized. Around them, showing classified documents, video feeds, and technical schematics. Vera felt sick as she recognized their theoretical work twisted into weapons applications. Operation Mindforge, Ghost explained as images of military facilities flashed past. "Kane has been using modified versions of your consciousness transfer protocols to create what he calls loyalty overlays, personality modifications that can be implanted in soldiers to ensure absolute obedience." "That's impossible," Jace protested. "The quantum matrices would destabilize within weeks, yes, leading to severe neural degradation and eventual death." Ghost's voice carried unexpected emotion. "He's been using political prisoners and captured enemies as test subjects. The mortality rate is 93%. Vera sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the horror their work had enabled. "How many?" "Over 2,000 subjects in the past 18 months. The survivors become what Kane calls perfect soldiers, utterly loyal, incapable of questioning orders, and completely disposable when their neural architecture finally collapses." "We have to stop this," Jace said, though she could see him wavering as the suppressors continued their work. His recovered memories were fading like dreams upon waking. "Agreed. But first, we need to get you both to safety." Ghost's display showed tactical maps of the surrounding area. "Kane's forces are converging on this location. He's deployed a full extraction team led by Colonel Reeves." "Reeves?" Vera knew that name from intelligence briefings. "Kane's personal enforcer, the one who handles the wet work. Among other duties, he's also one of the early test subjects for the loyalty overlay process, one of the few to survive beyond the initial degradation phase." Ghost highlighted approaching vehicle signatures. "He'll be here in 8 minutes. Vera stood, checking her equipment. The scrambler had maybe one more use left. Her armor's power cells were at 60%, and she had exactly 3 flashbang grenades and a sidearm that would be useless against military-grade armor. "Options?" she asked. "Limited. The facility has 2 exits. The way you came, which is now compromised, and an emergency shaft that leads to the old mining complex. However, that route will take you directly through Reeves's patrol path." Jace was gripping his head now, the neural warfare playing out behind his eyes becoming visible. "The suppressors are winning," he said through gritted teeth. "I can feel myself forgetting again." "Then we need a permanent solution." Vera turned to Ghost's central processing core. "Can you create a counter-virus? Something that would permanently disable the neural blocks?" "Theoretically, yes. but it would require direct interface with his suppression implants, and the process would be unpleasant. There's also a significant risk of permanent brain damage if the extraction goes wrong. Do it, Jace said immediately. I won't go back to being their puppet. The risks are acceptable compared to forgetting you again. He managed a pained smile. Besides, we started this together. Seems fitting we should finish it the same way. Vera felt her heart clench. 3 years of careful planning, of building resources and gathering intelligence, all leading to this moment where everything balanced on the edge of a blade. But she'd known from the beginning that saving Jace might cost him everything. Ghost, begin the extraction sequence, she ordered, and prepare a full data dump of everything we've collected on Kane's operations. If we don't make it out, someone needs to know what he's been doing. Understood. Dr. Thorne, please place your hand on the interface pad. Jace approached the quantum core, his face pale but determined. As his palm touched the crystalline surface, arcs of energy danced between his fingers and the device. His body went rigid, back arching as Ghost's systems interfaced directly with his neural implants. On the screens around them, Vera watched readouts of the battle taking place inside Jace's mind. The military conditioning fought viciously to maintain control, while Ghost's counter-virus worked to systematically disable each suppression protocol. It was like watching a war fought with electricity and mathematics, beautiful and terrifying, in equal measure. Vera, he gasped, his voice distorted by the neural interface. If this goes wrong, it won't, she said firmly, though she had no way to be certain. You're stronger than their programming. You always were. Alarms began, blaring as Ghost detected the approaching vehicles. 90 seconds until contact, the AI announced. Neural extraction at 60% completion. Through the facility's external cameras, Vera watched armored figures deploying from military transports. Colonel Reeves was unmistakable even in full battle armor, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the mechanical precision of someone whose personality had been artificially optimized for combat efficiency. Can you accelerate the process? She asked. Not without risking severe neural trauma, Ghost replied. The suppression networks are more complex than I anticipated. Kane has learned much from your original research. Vera made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She drew her sidearm and positioned herself between Jace and the facility's main entrance. 3 grenades, limited ammunition, and possibly the most important 30 seconds of her life stretching ahead. Ghost, transfer as much tactical data as you can to my armor's systems. I'm going to buy us some time. Dr. Cross, the odds of successfully engaging a full military squad are irrelevant, she interrupted. Just get him back, the real him. Whatever it takes. Behind her, Jace screamed as Ghost's systems tore through the final layers of neural conditioning. On the screens, cascading data streams showed his original personality reasserting itself. 3 years of suppressed memories flooding back like a broken dam. The facility's main door exploded inward, and Colonel Reeves stepped through the smoke like death in powered armor. Dr. Vera Cross, he said in a voice devoid of human warmth. You will surrender immediately and submit to neural restructuring. Resistance will result in termination. Vera smiled, her finger hovering over the detonator for her first grenade. Counteroffer, Colonel, go to hell. The explosion lit up the chamber like a star being born, and in that brilliant instant before chaos consumed everything, she heard Jace's voice behind her. Clear, strong, and completely, unmistakably himself. Vera, the emergency protocols. Ghost has them ready. She turned to see him standing at the quantum core, his eyes blazing with recovered intelligence and something that might have been love. Around them, Ghost systems were already initiating a complete data purge while simultaneously uploading everything they'd gathered about Kane's crimes to secure networks across human space. Together? He asked, extending his hand. Always, she replied, taking it as the world exploded around them. And somewhere in the chaos of battle and revelation, Dr. Vera Cross allowed herself to believe that some endings were actually beginnings, and that love might just be the strongest quantum force of all.